There are moments in sports when a coach steps to a microphone and says something so revealing, so disconnected from the reality everyone else is watching, that it stops being about basketball and starts being about something much more serious. This is one of those moments. What Stephanie White said before and after the Washington Mystics game wasn't just a bad press conference. It wasn't a coach having an off day with the media. It was a window into how she understands her job, what she thinks her responsibilities are, and what she apparently believes she was hired to protect. And what that window revealed should concern every single person who has a stake in what the Indiana Fever represents right now. Because here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody in that organization seems willing to say out loud. The Indiana Fever are not just a basketball team. They're one of the most commercially significant sports products in the history of women's basketball, built almost entirely around one player's ability to do things on a basketball court that nobody else on the planet can do. And the person currently directing that player's role within the offense responded to fan frustration about that player's usage by essentially saying the fans don't matter, that the experience of watching the product doesn't matter, that winning, in whatever form it takes, regardless of how it looks or feels or what it costs the entertainment value of the whole operation, is sufficient. It is not sufficient, and the attendance figures at Gainbridge Gatehouse are proving that in real time, one empty seat at a time. Before the Washington Mystics game even tipped off, White was already in a press conference setting saying things that demanded a harder look. A reporter asked her a straightforward question. Fans are frustrated. A neighbor told this reporter he was yelling at his TV because he wanted Caitlin to shoot more. Social media is full of the same frustration. What does White say to those fans? Her answer was stunning in its casual dismissal. She said she doesn't really have an answer for the fans, that she answers to the team and the franchise, that they are trying to win ball games and not trying to appease the masses. Read that back slowly. Not trying to appease the masses. The masses in question are the people who filled that arena, the people who bought those tickets, the people whose viewership numbers generated the media contracts and the national attention that transformed this franchise from a middling WNBA organization into a genuine cultural phenomenon. White didn't frame their concerns as something she was working to address. She didn't acknowledge the legitimacy of their frustration. She dismissed it, with a phrase that suggests she views the fan experience as a kind of noise existing outside the boundary of her actual responsibilities. That framing is not just tone deaf, it is a fundamental misreading of what her job actually is. Because when you are the head coach of the Indiana Fever in the Caitlin Clark era, the fan experience is not separate from your competitive mission. It is woven directly into it. The organization's entire commercial identity, its ticket revenue, its broadcast deals, its merchandise sales, its national profile, every single one of those things is downstream of the entertainment product Clark produces when she is allowed to play her actual game. Dismissing fan concerns about that product as something you don't have an answer for isn't a neutral coaching philosophy. It's a commercial liability that the attendance numbers are already beginning to quantify. Let's talk about those attendance numbers because they are not a minor footnote in this story. They are the central fact around which everything else needs to be understood. The Washington Mystics game was half empty. Not slightly below capacity, not a few hundred seats down from a typical night, half empty. Visible, substantial, widely photographed gaps in the seating of an arena that was packed, electric, and overflowing during Caitlin Clark's first 2 seasons with this franchise. White's pregame comments downplayed this reality. She communicated with the kind of breezy confidence that suggests she either doesn't fully grasp what the attendance decline means or doesn't consider it her problem. But here is why it absolutely is her problem, and why the framing of it as anything else is dangerously wrong. The people who stopped showing up are not institutional Indiana Fever loyalists who have been following this franchise through thick and thin for 20 years. They are Caitlin Clark fans, people who arrived when Clark arrived, people who bought tickets and planned evenings around what Clark was producing on that floor, the logo threes from 35 feet, the behind-the-back passes in traffic, the no-look feeds that turned routine possessions into genuinely electric moments, the kind of competitive performance that makes you feel like you are watching something rare and important and worth being present for.
Those people did not stop caring about the Indiana Fever. They stopped caring about the Indiana Fever as coached by Stephanie White. That distinction is not a small one. It is the entire argument. The product changed. The experience of watching the product changed. And the people who came specifically for the product that existed before White arrived are now expressing their response to the change the only way consumers can. They are not buying tickets. They are not filling seats. They are sending a message with their absence that no amount of press conference confidence can neutralize. And when the head coach's response to that message is essentially that she doesn't have an answer for the fans, the message being sent back is that she may not understand what the message is actually saying. To understand exactly how dramatic the change has been, you have to go back to what this offense looked like before White arrived, because the contrast is almost impossible to overstate. This Indiana Fever team was scoring 100 points per game, not occasionally, consistently. The offensive formula was not complicated, and it did not require some genius-level system to execute. It was built around two foundational realities. Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston in pick-and-roll situations create a defensive problem that no team in the league has a clean answer for. Clark, drawing the coverage, creates driving lanes, kick-out windows, and pull-up opportunities that Boston's post presence make impossible to ignore without surrendering something catastrophic. Kelsey Mitchell positioned on the weak side to receive those kick-out opportunities and punish defenses that overcommitted to the Clark-Boston action, the team pushing pace in transition to generate easy baskets before half-court defenses could organize. That was it. That was the system. Basketball sound, player empowering, and genuinely entertaining to watch because it was built around letting Clark do what Clark does. White arrived and replaced it. The new system positions Boston at the three-point line rather than in the post, removing the interior threat that made the Clark-Boston pick-and-roll so punishing, the offensive hub role that routes primary creative responsibility through distribution patterns that don't center Clark as the decisive playmaking force. The result of these changes is not theoretical or philosophical, it is measurable and it is damning. Against the Washington Mystics, one of the weaker teams in this league, the Indiana Fever scored 78 points. 78! The same roster that was producing 100 points a night the season before, with the same franchise player in the same arena against a bottom-tier opponent, needed a game-winning shot in the final seconds just to avoid losing. That is not a coaching philosophy producing competitive excellence. That is a coaching approach consuming a previously functional offensive system and replacing it with something that the final score lines are consistently exposing as inferior. And the fans watching this transformation happen in real time are not misreading the situation. They are not naive spectators who don't understand the complexity of professional basketball. They are responding accurately to an observable reality. The product got worse, the entertainment value declined, the experience of watching changed in ways that made it less worth planning an evening around. And the people making the decisions that produced those changes responded to the fan reaction by suggesting that fans don't really understand how basketball works. That framing deserves to be challenged directly and forcefully because it gets the accountability relationship exactly backwards. Then, Clark saved the game. Late possession, maximum pressure, the franchise on the edge of a genuinely embarrassing loss to a Washington team that had no business being in this game at that stage, Clark absorbed the pressure of missing 2 consecutive free throws, reset, and converted the most difficult shot available in the most consequential moment of the night, Pure individual brilliance under conditions that would have broken lesser players, the kind of moment that reminds everyone in that building and everyone watching at home exactly what they came to see. That moment happened. Clark delivered it. The win went into the record column, and then the post-game press conference happened. White stepped to the microphone to discuss Clark's game-winning heroics, and the framing of her comments produced its own specific controversy that cannot be brushed aside just because the result was a win. White credited Kelsey Mitchell's contribution to the sequence in a way that observers found conspicuously disproportionate to Clark's singular and decisive individual act. She highlighted the pass Clark made to Mitchell on an earlier possession. She spoke about Mitchell finding her balance and making a layup as a winning play. She contextualized Clark's game winner within a broader sequence of contributions, rather than naming it plainly as what it was: the decisive, game-saving, individual act of the franchise player under maximum competitive pressure.
The thing that makes this framing so pointed is the direct contrast with how a recent performance by Mitchell herself was handled. When Mitchell was jacking up shots with poor efficiency against the New York Liberty, generating turnovers and being identified as one of the competitive problems in a damaging loss, the post-game accountability framing from White was notably broader, more diffused, less specifically attributive. Mitchell's role in what went wrong was not named with the same directness that Clark's role in what went right was distributed across the sequence. Those two communication patterns existing in close proximity are not a coincidence, and they are not an accident. They reveal something about how White publicly presents her roster that observers are fully justified in examining carefully. When a player contributes to a loss, the framing diffuses accountability. When the franchise player saves a game with an extraordinary individual act, the framing distributes the credit. That asymmetry is the issue. But the post-game press conference produced something even more analytically significant than the credit distribution discussion, something White herself confirmed, apparently without recognizing how revealing the confirmation was. White acknowledged in her post-game comments that the game-winning play was drawn up by assistant coach Austin Kelly during the final timeout. She credited Kelly for designing the action that gave Clark the shot she needed. She said it as though it were an unremarkable detail, a nice acknowledgement of a colleague's contribution, a moment of coaching staff solidarity. What it actually was, stated in plain terms, was a confession. In the highest stakes moment of the game, the most consequential possession of the night, the moment when the right decision mattered most, the organizational intelligence that recognized what needed to happen was housed in the assistant coach rather than the head coach. The right decision was to design a play for Clark, not to run the hub offense, not to route the action through the distribution patterns White's system typically produces, to put the ball in Clark's hands and let Clark win the game. The assistant coach made that decision. The head coach's own public statement confirmed the distinction between what the assistant drew up in that timeout and what the head coaching approach produces across 40 minutes of a typical game. That contrast is the most significant admission this entire post-game produced, and it came word for word directly from White herself. Think about what that means for a moment. Across the course of a full game, across an entire season of games, the system White has installed has not consistently produced the decision to center Clark as the decisive competitive force. But in the final timeout, when everything was on the line and there was no margin for a wrong choice, the person who got it right was the assistant. The head coach confirmed this publicly. And then the Indiana Fever won the game because the assistant was right, and the play the assistant designed gave the franchise player the shot she needed. The head coach got the win in the record column. The assistant coach got the result right in the moment that mattered most. That gap is the story inside the story. There is another dimension to this accountability picture that has been generating significant discussion among the fan base, and it involves Lexie Hall's minutes allocation. Hall played 6 minutes in the first half of the Washington Mystics game. 6 minutes. against one of the weaker teams in the league, in a game that was competitive and uncomfortable throughout. A player who ranks among the most efficient producers on this entire roster when she is on the floor received 6 first-half minutes and was essentially watching the game from the bench during stretches when Indiana needed exactly what Hall provides. The production case for Hall is not complicated. She shoots efficiently from the three-point positions that Clark's playmaking creates. Her defensive engagement and movement-based contributions to the offensive structure are precisely what the system needs more of. When Hall is on the floor, the spacing works better. The defense has more to account for. The Clark-created opportunities are more effectively converted. These are not speculative claims about Hall's potential. They are documented production realities that the minutes she has received this season should be reflecting, and are not reflecting. When a player shoots 100% from the field and defends with genuine effectiveness and receives 6 first-half minutes, while players with meaningfully inferior efficiency metrics receive substantially more floor time, the discrepancy is not a minor rotation curiosity. It demands organizational explanation.
Now, rumors have been circulating in the fan community that Hall's limited minutes may be connected to her documented close friendship with Clark. That suggestion cannot be confirmed from outside the organization. It should not be stated as fact, and it is not being stated as fact here. What can be stated as fact is that the minutes allocation does not reflect Hall's production, and when a player who generates positive results every time she steps on the floor is consistently deployed in a way that minimizes her impact, the coaching decisions producing that deployment deserve scrutiny, regardless of what is or is not driving them. The fans asking questions about Hall's usage are not asking unreasonable questions. They are responding to an observable discrepancy between production and deployment that the coaching staff has not explained in any satisfying way. Here is the core of what makes everything Stephanie White said before and after the Washington Mystics game so consequential and so revealing. She was not hired simply to install a defensive system and manage a roster rotation. She was hired to be the head coach of a franchise whose entire commercial identity, whose ticket revenue, whose broadcast relevance, whose national profile, whose position as the most talked about product in women's basketball is built almost entirely around one player's capability to do things that no other player in the league can do. That is not a normal coaching assignment. It comes with a specific and unusual responsibility that goes beyond scheme design and rotation management. It requires understanding what Caitlin Clark is, not just as a basketball player in the traditional sense, but as a commercial and cultural phenomenon whose entertainment output is inseparable from the organization's competitive mission. The people who filled Gainbridge Fieldhouse during Clark's first 2 seasons were not coming just for wins. Teams win basketball games all the time. Wins alone do not generate the kind of national attention, the kind of sold-out arenas, the kind of cultural conversation that the Indiana Fever were producing before White arrived. Those things were generated by the Clark Show, the logo threes, the no-look passes, the competitive electricity that Clark's unrestricted game creates in a building and through a television screen, the genuine feeling that on any given night you might see something that nobody has ever done before in a basketball game. That is what sold those tickets. That is what drove those viewership numbers. That is what put the Indiana Fever on the national map in a way no WNBA franchise has ever been placed before. White's coaching approach has changed that product. The same player, the same arena, the same team, but a fundamentally different experience of what watching the Indiana Fever looks and feels like. And White's response to the fans who have noticed the change and expressed their dissatisfaction through reduced attendance and vocal criticism is to essentially tell them that she doesn't have an answer for them, that she answers to the team and the franchise, not to the masses. But here is what that framing misses entirely. The fans expressing that frustration through empty seats are the franchise in the most direct financial sense possible. Their purchasing decisions are what make the organizational opportunities that White benefits from possible. Their presence in those seats is what makes the Indiana Fever commercially significant.
Their absence is the franchise telling White something that her press conference responses suggest she is not hearing clearly. There is one final thing that needs to be said clearly before closing this conversation. Clark saved this game. That is real, it is significant, and it deserves direct acknowledgement without qualification. Clark absorbed the pressure of a difficult moment, overcame the adversity of the missed free throws, and converted a shot that required extraordinary individual skill under maximum competitive stress. That is what Clark does. That is who Clark is. And the Washington Mystics game confirmed it one more time in the most dramatic way available.
But Clark saving the game does not make the coaching decisions that made the save necessary acceptable. It does not resolve the attendance decline. It does not explain the offensive regression from 100 points per game to 78 against a bottom-tier opponent. It does not account for the assistant coach drawing up the decisive final play while the head coaching system spent 40 minutes producing something less decisive. It does not address the Lexi Hall minutes situation, and it absolutely does not excuse the pre-game press conference comments that dismissed the concerns of the fans whose absence is already visibly reshaping what an Indiana Fever home game looks and feels like. Stephanie White stepped to that podium and communicated something close to indifference toward the commercial damage her coaching approach is producing. Maybe that characterization is ungenerous. Maybe she is more aware of the stakes than the press conference framing suggested. But if the comments she put on the public record before and after the Washington Mystics game accurately represent her understanding of her position, then the gap between what she thinks her job is and what the franchise's commercial reality actually demands has grown to a point where that gap itself is the most important story in Indiana Fever basketball right now. The fans are not yelling at their TVs because they don't understand professional basketball. They are yelling because they understand exactly what they are watching, and they remember clearly what they used to watch, and they can feel the difference between those two things every time the Indiana Fever take the floor. The empty seats at Gainbridge Fieldhouse are not noise, they are data. They are the most honest feedback mechanism available to a consumer base that has been given no other way to communicate what they think about the product they are being offered. And the coaching staff's apparent dismissal of what that data means is the most troubling thing that came out of everything Stephanie White said before and after the Washington Mystics game. The fans are telling the truth with their absence. The only question that remains is whether anyone in that organization is actually listening.